Welcome to Bringing Back the Wild. In each episode, Mike Arnold explores how science, tradition, and hands-on conservation come together to protect the wild places and wildlife we care about. Your host, Mike Arnold, is a professor of genetics, a lifelong hunter, and a conservation biologist. As a genetics professor who spends as much time in the woods as he does in the lab, Mike studies wildlife, a passion for hunting, and cares deeply about conservation. On this podcast, Mike dives into the science and stories behind bringing wildlife species back and keeping wild places wild. Bringing Back the Wild is brought to you by Lifeform Taxidermy, guardian of the hunter's dreams. Zambezi Delta Safaris, protecting wildlife, empowering communities, defining adventure. Royal Outfitters UK, tradition in the field, excellence in the hunt. Safari Specialty Importers, because getting your trophies home to you is all we do. Now, here's your host, Mike Arnold.
Well, welcome to Bringing Back the Wild, and I just want to say that I have one of my absolute favorite folks on the show today, and his name is Larry Weishuhn, and I don't pronounce his last name very well ever. He did one time when I did not know him real well. I told him there were a lot of consonants in his last name, and I said to him, I asked him, Larry, would you tell me how to pronounce your name? And with a twinkle in his eye that if you know Larry, he gets when he's about to do something, he said, it's pronounced Larry. And so I'm just going to call him Larry. So, but he's known to many, many of us as Mr. Whitetail. So Larry, welcome to Bringing Back the Wild.
Mike, thank you so much. You have no idea. You're such a very special person in my life as far as I'm concerned. Probably in Miss Francis's too, but in a little bit different way. But also in so many other different ways for so many people. The work that you've done and what you continue to do in terms of wildlife conservation and making people aware of what true wildlife conservation means, what the culture of hunting means to not only the people, but to the animals and the habitat itself. The work that you've done and continue to do, it is such an honor because of that and our dear friendship that I can't even put into words how tickled I am to be on the podcast with you.
Well, thank you so much. This is turnabout's fair play, right? Because you've had me on yours so many darn times, and I've loved every time.
And hopefully a whole lot more.
Absolutely. Well, on both ways. Larry, I mentioned to you earlier what I would like you to do, and maybe everybody knows your story real well, but quite often people ask me how I got to be a hunter, how I ended up being a scientist and a conservationist. And you're all of those things as well. And so would you walk us through a little bit and tell us your story? When did you start hunting? Why did you start hunting? And you get to hunt a whole lot more than I do, and I'm jealous as heck. But tell our listeners, who is Larry Weishuhn in terms of his hunting career?
In terms of a hunting career, I don't remember my first hunt, quite frankly, because I had a dad who loved hounds, loved horses, loved to hunt, all those kind of things, but also a maternal granddad. His name was A.J. Oschenbeck, and he was a county commissioner. And from the time that I can remember, and even before I can remember, he would come by each morning and he'd have coffee with my mom because my dad was out working somewhere generally. And next thing I know, he and I'd be going fishing somewhere on the creek for perch and what we used to call bass trout when I was growing up there. And I grew up it used to be 80 miles west of Houston. Now it's a whole lot closer than that. But grew up out in the country. And with that being the case, I was outdoors all the time. And then during the times when my dad worked in the oil field initially, and quite often through publications such as Outdoor Life Field and Strange Sports Field, my mom would somehow or another garner those from one of my uncles. And she would either read to me from the pages of those, or we'd look at the photographs. And that's where I remember. I can remember being held on the arms of my dad and granddad as we were out going squirrel hunting. Now, back then, there were deer in that area, but not very many. And we hunted deer. But if you even so much as saw a deer track, oh my God, you were a hero. If you happened to actually take a deer or see a deer, you truly were the hero for the year. And it was a totally different time. But squirrel hunting was really big. I'm sure we had squirrel seasons, but I can't remember as a child whether we adhered to the seasons or not. Uh, so I grew up in a situation of being in the outdoors and of being around livestock, understanding a little bit from the word go about range management, that you had to have grass for the cattle to eat if you expected to have any calves, that you had to have some kind of habitat for those animals, particularly rabbits, which we hunted with beagles on a Sunday afternoon, and trees and food for the raccoons that my dad loved to chase. So I got a good understanding from that in the beginning. Same thing with the fish, and we fished a lot when I was a little kid, and we ate every fish nearly that we caught, except probably some of the really small ones. But always I helped with the cleaning of the fish, and I was always curious. I was opening what I perceived was their stomach to see what they were eating, kind of, because that was going to be the bait that we're going to use next. So that's how a lot of that initially started. But I grew up essentially out in the woods, and to be very open with you, when I had to start grade school or first grade, I thought I'd died and gone to hell. To have to be sitting in a classroom when I really wanted to be outdoors somewhere doing things, that was kind of the initial start with everything, with including looking at the photographs of animals that I dared hard. I don't even know that I dared dream about hunting them one of these days, and just kind of being along the way at the right place at the right time, came along to realize that grew up in a situation where we were in the cattle business, hog business and chicken business. And back in the early days, I was my dad's automatic feeder, automatic water, and that meant carrying 100-pound sacks of feed and 2 5-gallon buckets filled with water everywhere you went. So when I had a chance to get finished with that I continued going to the woods. Got to know a game warden through my grandfather, who they were good friends, and got to know a little bit about what a game warden, or back then there were very few wildlife biologists, but I kind of thought, well, maybe that's, I love the outdoors. Came to the realization that if I'm ever going to do anything like that, very quickly I had to get some kind of education. And as I was getting ready, graduating from high school, I was supposed to go to Texas A&M, and then my daddy ended up with hepatitis, and they treated him wrong, and he was in intensive care for a long time. So I kind of didn't get to go to A&M to start with, but went to Wharton County Junior College, continued hunting, got married with my high school sweetheart, Mary Ann, from when we were sophomores, and then went to Texas A&M, and very fortunately went to work, did all kinds of different things to stay in school, hunted and fished. If we couldn't catch it, we didn't kill it, we didn't eat, kind of thing during those years. But then got to know Dr. R.M. Robinson. I went to work for the Wildlife Disease Project at Texas A&M University under him, and Dr. Mick Robinson was one of the preeminent, if not at the time, and probably still to these days, best wildlife pathologists there was. And we were involved in all kinds of different projects, particularly dealing with whitetail deer, and then also did a lot of work at the time with desert bighorn sheep, trying to come up with a natural means of vaccinating them against blue tongue, which would pretty much are EHD. It pretty much wiped out the sheep population out in West Texas. But we also did a lot of nutrition work, traveled across the state, got to know so many people across the state as far as the biology is concerned, because if they had a problem with anything, we got called in, and I'd spend a day in Amarillo, and then the next day after a day's drive, I'd be in El Paso, and another day or two's drive, I'd be, East Texas. So got to cover a lot of the state, got to know a lot of the people, got to see a lot of different habitats, and got to have an appreciation for true wildlife conservation, how important hunting was, that if we didn't have hunting, those populations didn't exist for a lot of reasons. One being the keeping the habitat in a good situation where they're not starving to death, and then pretty soon along the way, then landowners learned that deer are worth some dollars, and it was just a continual thing. And I always loved to read, always loved to write. Wrote my first magazine article back in 1970, and it was about the work that we did with the desert bighorn sheep, and in doing some of the work out in far west Texas, but also dealing with um, what we did to try to make this situation work of naturally immunizing sheep against blue tongue. But so many different things. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff there as well too. Hunted all
No.
during that time, fished every time I got an opportunity, and finally figured out that hell wasn't quite so bad after I graduated out of A&M kind of thing.
Well, my own students at the University of Georgia and even before, they say, "Oh, you must have loved school because you went through and got your PhD
Right.
and did all this sort of stuff and loved school." And I said, "I hated school. I was a terrible student." Well, how did you become a professor? Because I didn't ever want to take an exam again in my life, but I don't mind giving them. So, my students are like, "Well, I just don't understand how you could." I said, "I put up with it because I wanted to do at the end. I knew I needed this union card, is what I call my PhD." And
Yes, sir.
that doesn't sound like you value it much. And I said, "Heck, if I could have been a professor with a high school degree, I would have been a professor with a high school degree." Well, now when did you look, folks, y'all remember this is Larry, Mr. Whitetail. When did Mr. Whitetail kill his first whitetail? When did you hunt and get your first whitetail? Do
I
you
started
remember?
hunting with my dad sitting on a cedar tree limb when I was about 4 years of age. And when I got to be six, he put me out by myself on a ground, kind of a naturally built ground blind with a Remington 33 single shot 22 using a 22 long rifle. That happened to be the first bolt action, as I recall, that Remington ever made. It belonged to my granddad, my maternal granddad. I hunted with it for a long time. As I said, back then we hunted deer. You didn't hardly see a deer, and so
Yeah.
it wasn't until we got into the late 50s and early 60s that really that deer population started blossoming, and
Mm,
that had more to do with the fact that we had controlled the screwworm fly. The
mm,
screwworm, the larval stage of the screwworm fly, is a live flesh eating, and unfortunately, we kind of may be facing that again. But
yep.
they figured out very quickly that that screwworm fly only bred one time. So they radiated billions of flies and dropped them all over Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas and Mexico and wherever that fly existed, and were able to get rid of it just because it bred it out of existence, if you will. That's when the deer population came in. So finally in 1961, and back then we were still, I think we had maybe just gone under regulatory authority, because prior to that, the deer season always opened November 16th. Now it opened the weekend before. Remember sitting in the stand, I've got my granddad's single shot shotgun, Grandpa Aschenbeck's single shot. He called it the Roar. And it did roar. And I was sitting up there high up in an oak tree. I got a double up buck stuck in the barrel. I got another double up buck stuck in my mouth right here. Got there at like 4:30 in the morning. Now it didn't get daylight until about 6:30 or 7, but by golly, I was going to be in that tree before the deer came by. Sitting up there, finally, just about slobbered all over sitting up there, finally hear a shot. And I know it's now opening the deer season. The season is legal shooting time. And I hear something. I look down, and this world record whitetail deer comes running by me. I'm up in an oak tree about 30 feet off the ground. I'm just, oh my God, it's a deer. I can't believe it's illegal. No, it's a world record. It's huge. And I remember that shotgun had a little bead on the front of the barrel, had a little notch in the back. So that was the sighting system that's used. I finally remembered to have the shotgun. The deer stopped right underneath me. I shot, and deer went down. And oh my God, I'm just so excited. Oh, so excited going to this point. But then when the deer went down, oh my God, I got him. I got him. I got him. And about that time, this world record deer gets up and runs off. And I remember I've got this double up buck stuck in my mouth kind of thing. And I grabbed that shotgun and I pushed the lever to open the barrel. pull a little bit too hard on the fore end. Now, on the old guns, they weren't screwed onto the barrel. There was a little clip that they fit on. Well, when I broke this shotgun open, guess what? I tugged too hard on the fore end, disengaged the barrel. The barrel sticks in the mud down 30 feet down there. My world record whitetail deer is running off over here. Still got the double lock buck stuck in my mouth. And for a moment, I thought seriously about jumping out of that tree. Finally, reason returned, and I kind of halfway fell down this big old oak tree, ran down there, grabbed the barrel, and blew all the mud out of it, stuck that thing, and I took off at a run at the way this deer had gone, just looking at through the yopons and the briars and the cedars and the oaks, looking way ahead. And I fall right over this world record deer. I'm
Oh,
looking
be
so far
darned.
away. I fall over and turn around to look to see what it is. Here's this world record whitetail deer had 40 inches of spread, 40 points, 6 inches of mass. I turn around and look at it, and it turns out to be this spike that's about that long. And I've got it sitting up here in the corner.
Hey,
With all the mounts that are in here, if I had to get rid of all these mounts except for one, it would be
it
that
would
little
be
spike
that one
with a neck
spike.
mount that looks like a rat with horns. So that was my first whitetail deer that I actually took. Now I'd been hunting for, I guess I was 14, 13 to 14, so I'd been hunting 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it was, on my own every year, hoping to find a deer, and finally got one.
And that
That was
was
the beginning
19,
of my serious whitetail deer hunting.
so that was 1961, you said.
Yes, sir.
I killed
1960.
my first whitetail in 62. So
Oh my
that was
goodness.
in San Saba, near San Saba is when I
Oh
killed,
yes,
and mine was a doe. Mine wasn't a world record buck like yours. So, well, so with that, um, did it become consistently easy then for you to continue to get whitetails every year? And let me ask a question. Your world record whitetail, my world record doe whitetail probably was back in those days in 62, was about the, in, at least in the hill country, it was about the size of a jackrabbit. I mean, they were not real huge deer back then. We would get deer every year. He would fill out, all of our licenses were filled out,
right.
and we got all the deer on those licenses, including, this is embarrassing probably for me to say as a conservation biologist now, including the ones that my mama and my sister got who never hunted. So,
Well, times were different back
well,
then as
we
far
ate
as
off of
concerned.
them, right? I mean, those were our meat. If we didn't get the
Yes,
deer, we didn't eat meat. That's the bottom line. I mean, or if we didn't get dove, or we didn't get quail, or we didn't get rabbits. We didn't have squirrels around where we were, really very many of them. Not in, I mean, none in Abilene that I know of still, but there are probably some now. But we didn't have a lot of meat if we didn't hunt and we didn't fish. So it was fine. So now, let me ask you a quick question now. Another question, I should say. Walk us through your becoming the consummate wildlife biologist that you are, and you are called on constantly to do range management. And I know you said, you grew up with that sense, like I did, being in an agricultural setting. You and I both came to understand, hey, you gotta, I mean, it was just natural. I don't think, maybe you didn't realize it. I didn't realize it at the time that I was learning all this stuff about these agricultural systems. And let's face it, I think that a hunting managed area, to me, excuse me, is an agricultural system. I think of it that way, because it's humans who are being real careful with that area to make sure that it has animals, plants, etc., that it needs, like you've said. But how did you, you said, hey, maybe I should go to Texas A&M and study wildlife biology. There's not a lot of wildlife biologists around. Were you one of the first on the ground in, especially Texas? You could have, just to say, it wasn't real smart of you to choose Texas as a wildlife biologist, since you have said I drove one day to get to somewhere and then I have to drive another day to get to somewhere else, you picked a big state to do this in, which is also good for you. But, walk us through that, those early days. I mean, who was around besides Larry Weishuhn in terms of land management?
There actually were some very great people at the time, and all this interest in whitetail deer that we came to know, as far as I started, really started with two individuals. That was John Wooders, who was an outdoor writer. John, for the first time ever in national magazines, started writing about hunting mature deer. Up until then, it was just deer hunting. At the same time, a gentleman by the name of Jerry Smith, who was who worked down on the King Ranch with the in the petroleum industry, and Jerry was an excellent photographer. Well, guess what? Jerry started taking pictures of what mature deer look like. So
Uh,
this goes back to, and they started showing up in magazines. John and Jerry got together, and both of them got to be very dear friends of mine. We actually ended up doing a video years ago called Whitetail Judging Trophies, which was the first time anybody had done anything like that, talking about how to age deer on the hoof, how to estimate Boone and Crockett scores, and then give a little reason as to why an animal should be shot, not be shot, and what it took to get those animals there. But with me personally, it really began when I went to work for the Wildlife Disease Project, working at the time with Dr. Mick Robinson, who was a project leader, and Rod Marburger. Rod was a wildlife biologist for the state, and he was already working with the wildlife diseases. We started looking at a lot of different things in terms of the health of the animal. Well, a healthy animal produces a big body and produces better antlers. And those areas, such as what you were talking about around San Saba, those areas in Llano, they were known as huge Texas areas. The deer weren't very big because they didn't have anything to eat.
yeah.
There were sheep and goats everywhere. There were deer everywhere. So we started looking at nutrition things. And about the same time, people started becoming interested in bigger antlers and mature deer. And again, I put that blame, if you will, in a very positive manner on
Yep.
John Wooders and Jerry Smith. And we had have biologists down in Texas. One of his name was Al Brothers, and the other one was named Murphy Ray. And both those guys were very interested uh, bigger whitetail deer and range management and habitat. And both of them had good backgrounds from those kind of things. Well, they wrote a book called Producing Trophy Whitetails, which became essentially the Bible, and that was in about 1976. Now, the good part of it was with me personally is I was helping do a lot of that research, helping because I worked statewide, because I had the opportunity to look at a lot of different habitats and visit with a lot of biologists. We came up with management techniques that really kind of look more at the starting from the ground on up, and then trying to produce quality habitat. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we got to improve the habitat. And how do we do that? In some instances, that means taking a lot of deer. It means range management, all those kind of things. So that's where some of that came from. But it was also having the opportunity to look at and spend time with other biologists across the state, across the nation, actually, at the time, because at the time people were starting to, we had Texas for years was the mecca for whitetail deer. So everybody came if they wanted to shoot whitetail deer. Where what we did in the process of that is when these guys would come over, they finally started, well, why are these deer like this? We started explaining, well, guess what? Then they started doing it elsewhere, the same management type stuff that we were doing. But when you get right down to it, with me personally, again, it just being at the right place at the right time, but then taking advantage of that situation. The opportunity can knock on the door. It's up to you to open that door, and it's up to you to then follow through. And I just had a great work ethic growing up, carrying 100-pound sacks of feed and carried 5-gallon buckets, making for sure that the cattle had water, that the chickens had water, all had to feed. So it was a lot of basic stuff there that kind of came together. But again, it was just being at the right place at the right time, having great friends such as John Wooders and Jerry Smith and Murphy Ray and Al Brothers and Dr. Mick Robinson and Rod Marburger and a few other of the guys who had done some of the really early work when you got right down to it, having to do anything with whitetail deer.
Well, and So let's transition a little bit here, if you don't mind.
No,
I'm picking your brain an awful lot here. So
not much.
when did you decide that, along with being a wildlife biologist, you were going to become one of the best known names, and maybe you never made this decision, it just happened, but you took advantage of it, best known names in the outdoor writing, TV, now podcasting? I mean, when did that, or was it a transition, or was it just something that was happening at the same time you were a wildlife biologist?
It
Because
was a
you
common.
really know, you're known as by a lot of folks as a wildlife biologist, and then another group of folks, and there's an overlap there, know you as the outdoor writer, TV personality, etc.
It was really kind of a combination of several things when you get right down to it, because I grew up loving to read. I love the outdoor writers that were there, Jack O'Connor, and the list goes on and on and on and on, and Elmer Keith, and later on like Gris Gresham and a bunch of those guys, Russell Annabelle, Robert Rook, some of Hemingway's work,
Mhm.
all those kind of things. So I always loved to write, and I was always one of these people that, to begin with, in early life, I was very shy, and I figured out very quickly being very shy was not the way to be. So when the Parks and Wildlife Department at the time needed somebody to speak before a group, a lot of times I was the guy that did it, kind of thing. So I like and I enjoy people. I love people. I used to counsel students when I was at A&M, and I'd ask them why they were in wildlife, and they says, "Well, I love this, and I don't like people." And I'd grab them by the hand and I'd lead them to the door. And I said, "Okay, you're going to go find something else to do, because if you don't like people, you don't need to be in wildlife, because it's 99% people and 1% wildlife a lot of the time." But with that is, I love to write as well too, and I love to read. And the writing, I'd wrote a lot of stuff while I was with TPWD for them at the time. Long story short, they did not want anybody writing for any outside publications. Well,
Mhm.
I wanted to do some of that, so I started using several different aliases, and made sure that my photograph didn't appear, and all that kind of stuff for a while. And as it worked out, years ago, I served as worked statewide, worked a lot of stuff in North Texas, South Texas, on different projects. And then I was a technical assistance biologist for South Texas, which essentially meant that I worked with landowners to set up hunting program, or not hunting program, but wildlife management programs on their properties, starting from the ground on up. And what made the final transition is for me going into the writing thing. I love to write. I got a call one morning from the headquarters office saying, "Man, great news. We just created a job for you up here in the office at Austin, and you're going to be our next," whatever it was. So I thought about it a little bit, and I said, "Oh man, that's absolutely fantastic." Hung the phone up, called Marianne, and I said, "I'm quitting the state." And she said, "You doing what?" She said, "All you've ever talked about is being I said, "Yeah, but do you want to live in Austin? Do you want me to live in Austin with you and be miserable in the office?" And she goes, "No." So that's when I started my personal wildlife consulting business. But the secondary part of that was too, is at that point they did not want me writing, and I really wanted to do a lot of writing. And
Mhm.
so uh, I I had done, I said, several articles under aliases and all that kind of thing. And but it was time. It was time. So I set up my own consulting work, started doing a lot more writing. Again, thanks to the help of John Wooders, who introduced me to Craig Boddington, who introduced me to Basil Bradbury, who at the time was the editor of Peterson's Hunting. And that's where I sold my first story to them, gosh, many, many years ago. And it was actually about how to build your own John Wooders camouflage hat, like John used to wear. So, and wasn't long after that I met J. Wayne Fears, and Fears was still is, but was particularly then a very prolific outdoor writer, very knowledgeable, very just a great individual. And he and I got to be just super friends, and he and I hunted together a bunch. I brought him down to the ranches that I was managing at the time, and he introduced me to a lot of different folks, including Jim Bequette, who was the editor of Shooting Times. And next thing I know, I'm on staff with Shooting Times and on staff with Deer and Deer Hunting and a whole bunch of other publications. At the time, back then, magazines, the written word was king. I mean, all advertising was channeled to hunting and shooting publications. Well, after a while, TV started popping up a little bit more and a little bit more, and TNN came on the scene, and some of the outdoor shows. Uh, and in the process, I'd gotten to know Bill Jordan and hunted with Bill with the Realtree, and I was doing a bunch of stuff with them. And whenever they wanted somebody to talk about deer management, I was their guy. But all of a sudden, I saw that, hey, a lot of this money that we used to go to the magazine now going to TV.
Yep.
So I started doing a little bit more TV, started a TV show with a friend of mine who I also partnered with in the outfitting business, Bill Whitfield. And we started a show called Hunting the World.
Yep.
And that was on the Outdoor Channel for a long time. And in the process of that, same thing, I ended up being either a host or a co-host on many shows across the network. There was a time years ago when there were like four or five different outdoor networks. Well, I was on a TV show every day, somewhere there, and all that kind of thing. And then we go get a little bit farther down the way, and to where kind of where we are now. The outdoor TV is still good and still important, but not nearly as important as it once was. Whereas blogging and podcasting and all those other kind of things, to me, I've been very fortunate over years to have some absolutely fantastic sponsors, and one being Dallas Safari Club. I've got involved with them, gosh, back in 1987, and I've been a proponent of theirs for the work that they do and how they do things, and been very much involved with. They've been a great supporter of mine ever since then, as has Hornady Ammunition. I mean, I got to know Steve Hornady, got to know Jason, his son, when Jason was working for a rep group who rep for Thompson Center Arms, where I did some of the PR work for a while. So we got to know each other and got to be friends. And to this day, I can call up there and I say, can we do this? Oh, okay, yeah. Why you want to do it? Give me a good reason. Tell me what, and we'll do it. But so I've been very fortunate along those lines. But the thing that people don't see is the tremendous number of hours that are spent having done all this away from home, away from family. You have to have priorities. Family is a priority in so many different ways, but when there is that opportunity or the necessity sometimes, not to push your family away, but to find another time to do something with your family, such as my wife understands that when hunting seasons are here, I'm not home a whole lot during that. And have not been, but that she understands that that's been a way of life for me, but also that's what's paid our bills over the years as well too. So went from writing to TV to to the blogging to the podcasting, a lot of personal appearances, a lot of talks, a lot of different places, emceeing and supporting wildlife conservation groups. All those things played a very important, and some of them just naturally happened, and some of them were somewhat planned.
Well, and so there's going to be some younger folks listening to two old. No, I shouldn't use that language on this. I'm not supposed to swear on my own podcast, am I?
No.
So I can swear on yours, but I can't
Yes, you
swear on
can.
mine. No, but two old men talking because we're pretty close in age. And but there's some younger folks. What is your prediction on is someone breaking into this industry? What do they need to head to right now? How is their output? Where is their output going to
Where's
be
your
going?
output? Things,
Where should they concentrate their output over the next 5 years? If you were going to predict, people ask me this about my research science. Where are we going to be in 5 years? And a lot of times I'm like, I have no clue. But do you have a prediction for those young kids quote unquote kids that are our kids' age that are getting into the outdoor?
Back up, I started writing on a red Big Chief tablet with a, and I'll say something about it.
Yep.
And I didn't know they had tablets back then. I go, well, it was a lined sheet of paper, and you used a lead pencil with an eraser, and I went from there to a typewriter.
Okay, I'm going to
And then,
interrupt you for a moment.
yeah,
I'm much younger than you because I started on an Underwood typewriter.
well, that's where I was heading. And then we went to an electric typewriter, then
Yep.
computers came along.
Yeah.
Where I'm going with all this is that, even with photography, we used to take rolls of 36
Oh, yeah.
exposure Kodachrome slide film and hope you got one photograph out of all that. Things
Yep.
have changed, and things continually change all the time. Uh, to me, if somebody comes to me now, again, I'll ask, why do you want to do this?
Mhm.
And I very openly say you have to be very much a communicator these days if you want to be in this field. And that includes everything from standing up in front of a group and talking or answering questions to writing, whether it's for a digital publication, whether it's for a hard copy of publication, writing blogs, writing for websites, becoming the term that I really don't like, influencer.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll be very open about that, when you're an influencer, there's things like popularity and getting the job done. Now, just because somebody is very popular does not mean that they're going to parlay that into sales of products for some company or
Yep.
even imparting a great amount of knowledge. But these days, what that term being what it is, you have to gain toward that. Learn as much, what I tell
Mhm.
people, learn as much as you can about communications, where communications is now, such as what we're doing right here.
Yep.
Uh, learn about computers, so that learn about the phones, which are now magic little, computers that we carry everywhere. Learn everything you can along those lines. Learn the basics. Don't forget about the basics of anything, whether it's management, wildlife management, or whether it's basics about firearms or fishing or anything like that. I said, always return to those. Build you a good base of information, of experience not only in the outdoors, experience with people, experience with equipment, know how to do a camera, know how to edit footage together into a short program or a TV show, or something similar with that you can use on the internet. Learn all those kind of things, and then spend as much time as you can with the guy that's on the forefront of certain things to see how he or she does things. Not to say that you do what they do, but you can see trends from them as to where they're headed, so that you don't need to be the leader of the trend, but it's not a bad place to be like number two or number three or in that top five, to
Mhm.
where you can continue to learn from their experiences and their failures or their successes, to parlay those into something that you do. So to me, wildlife and hunting are going to be around a long time. We're just barely touching really the education part of wildlife management and wildlife conservation. And with that said, I'll say this: there are two terms that come to mind: preservation and conservation.
Mhm.
Conservation promotes life. It's the wise use of. Preservation kills, because
Mhm.
when you preserve one thing, you kill many other things in the process of it. So, the wolves are a perfect example. We're preserving wolves and grizzly bear, and we're doing away with almost all the other wildlife that's there right now. So,
Yep.
uh, whereas conservation would mean the wise use of, which would include hunting and which would
Mhm.
include controlling populations and numbers. And in going back to this other, we cannot ever forget, even no matter if you're an old guy getting into it, a young guy, it starts at the ground. It
Mhm.
starts with habitat. It's habitat in terms of humanity and habitat in terms of animals. Sometimes the two complement each other. Sometimes they're diametrically opposed.
Yep.
But I do a lot of talks about what you can do as an individual for wildlife. And one of the statements I make is, if you live in town and you got a yard and you plant grass and you have flowers, you have trees, you're a wildlife contributor, an influencer. If you live in a 14-story building and you got this little window that or a little porch in the back that you can step out and you got flowers there, you're a wildlife, you're contributing to wildlife, because
Mhm.
wildlife not only means the game animals that we're looking at on your wall and my wall, but everything from the little invertebrates and the little things that we see in the ground that break down leaves, that break down dead material, that put all those vitamins, minerals, elements, everything back into the system, kind of thing. So it starts at the ground. Don't ever
Yep.
forget that. And if you're going to get into the business, learn that. Learn from the experience of others. Talk to a lot of different people, whether they're successful and even if they're not successful. There a lot of times you'll learn something there, and have an open mind and be willing to learn something every day. Every time you visit with somebody, every time you go out to the outside or whatever, have an open mind and learn.
And that's wonderful advice for, you sound very similar to what I tell my students is, you need to understand that you don't know a lot, and none of us know everything, and we need to try to learn that what we're talking about a lot of times we have a very shallow understanding of, and we need a deeper one.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where, I love learning, of course,
Oh
I
yes.
really do, and you do too. I just came back from Coastal College of Georgia where I gave a talk. They wanted me to give a talk to their environmental science students. I've done it one time before on conservation through hunting, and this
Right.
time I said to them, "Do you mind if I push the envelope a little bit? Because a lot of these kids are not conservative kids." Okay,
No.
at Coastal College of Georgia, I knew but they're real nice and they're really
Right.
engaged with it. So I gave a talk called "Why Everyone Should Be Pro Hunting," and I only talked, and I told them at the time, I'm going to push every button in this room probably, but I said I only talked about the conservation through hunting of the mountain lion in North America.
Perfect.
And
Perfect.
bringing it back from the brink because we got rid of bounty hunting and we put in regulated sport hunting. And it's now, orders of magnitude more cats out there, but we still have to hunt the darn thing.
Right.
Because if we don't hunt it, we're not managing it. And that's what you've talked about with the wolves and grizzly bears. We better darn well hunt the things, or we've got apex predators going nuts, and which is what we have in a lot of places right now if they're going to limit the hunting. And you've already said that, look, you gotta manage them. And I tried to explain to the folks, the kids too, the students there, they asked me, why do we need to do hunting? And what about, they use the term preservation. I said, the problem is that you don't understand with that question, that seems to mean that you don't understand that nowhere on this globe is there an undisturbed habitat. There is no Eden out there. There's no pristine where we could step back and just let it balance itself out. There's nowhere like that.
No.
And I said, you've got to understand that. And with that understanding, that means we have a responsibility. You and I both are Christians. We both believe in good stewardship. And we both understand that that stewardship means that we have to control those populations or somebody, lots of species are going to lose out, which is what you just said.
And unfortunately, it happens that way. And unfortunately, people don't have an understanding, when you get right down to it. Sometimes you can put it into very, basic terms with people with, if you just, okay, you got a male and female cat,
Mhm.
you haven't spayed them, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to have a bunch of babies, and then you're going to have more babies. You're going to have more babies, and you've got them in an apartment, okay, or house or an enclosure. What's going to happen after a while? There's not going to be anything there except for cats, and then the cats are going to start eating themselves because they are carnivores, and just to survive and to have a their life and quality of life, I guess, and there's life in that you have a whole lot of cats there's quality in life if you have, a few cats in your house and they're taken well taken care of. They're happier, you're happier, and so sometimes I try to relate it to to things like that. But
Yep.
we have, as I talked about a little earlier, we're just barely touching the
Yep.
education side of things. And to me, and part of that comes from the fact that when you and I were growing up, I know where you grew up, and
Mhm.
I've been there. I lived in that area for a while and got to know those great folks up there and love that area, quite frankly. But we went from an understanding of the soil, an understanding of livestock, the understanding of taking care of pets and those kind of things, and the different things you have to do to provide for them and to ensure that they have a quality of life as well too. Well, we went from people who grew up on the farm, whose parents grew up on the farm or ranch, or grandparents and the kids got to visit, to where now there are not many people really getting out. So we've got people that these days, unfortunately, live, grow, are born, grow up, live, and die in a relatively small area, who never have had to deal with any taking care of animals or
Mm.
having an understanding of really taking care of animals and what that means. And so I think that's where our education needs to spend a lot of time, or our efforts at education needs to spend a lot of time, particularly in some of these urban areas.
Mhm.
That's again why a lot of times when I get a chance to talk, I talk about the flower pot that's on the 14th floor kind of thing.
Yep.
It gets them to thinking. And one of the best professors I ever had was a guy who I absolutely hated the first time I took a class under him. I finally figured out what he was trying to do, and he was simply trying to make you think,
Yep.
and to, in some instances, follow in direction. His name was Dr. Richard Baldoff, and he's unfortunately long since gone. His final on our herpetology test was, he'd show up, wore a bow tie, he had a brown leather satchel, and every time when he pulled out uh, the papers, chicken feathers and chicken excrement would fall out of the deal. Well, he handed out a final that was about
Uh,
60 or 70 pages of typed words. And he told you, he said, I want you to read the directions. Well, you had to read the directions. He had all kinds of minutia, let's call it that, on the front page. On the bottom, near the bottom of the second page, there was a statement: to complete this test, go to the last page, sign your name, and put the date. Well, they looked at that first page, and I mean, everybody went crazy. Well, I had, by then I kind of figured him out a little bit. So I looked up at him, and he looked me right in the eye, and he had a smile on his face because he knew what I had done. So, I went to the last, I paged through there for just a little bit, and I went to the last page and signed my name and date, and got up and threw the paper and said, this is total BS. And I walked up there and handed it to him and walked out. Of course, everybody in the class thought, oh my God, Larry Weishuhn's gone totally nuts. One other guy read the directions and did the same thing, because he figured there's no way I would quite do things the way that I did if there wasn't somewhere there. So he went back and read the directions. He did the same thing. And there were
uh,
about 40 people in that class. We were the only two that passed the final. But it was that, with trying to make you think,
yeah.
and uh, which I really, really, truly appreciate, and read the directions. That was one
Yep.
thing I learned about all that, I guess, when you get right down to it. But
Well, Frances was at my talk on this why everyone should be pro hunting, and I asked her what she thought. She was real sweet. She said you did a great job. She said, but you know what I appreciate is that you make them think.
yes,
You challenge it. You don't tell them what to think.
no, no,
You
no,
tell them how to think, and you
yes,
you lead them into, okay, here are the data. Now, what am I going to do with those? And so I said, well, I had great mentors. I'm like you. I had some of these guys who told you, read all the directions,
yes,
and and I had a lot of great mentors in all of this, teaching me, and I don't mean just professors. I'm talking about people like you, like Mark Haldane, recently, and all of these folks, Jack O'Connor, reading him, and he was a professor, I realize, but he was an English professor. That doesn't count.
That doesn't count, no.
But, I had a lot of good mentors who taught me to look at the world. I had, dirt farmers growing up in Elmdale, Texas, outside of Abilene, Texas. There was a sharecropper down the road from us, Mr. Davis. I will never forget him. He rounded up cattle in his old overalls and his work boots, and he could ride a horse better than anyone
That's
I'd ever seen. He didn't have any cowboy boots on, but that man could herd cattle, but he also knew how to raise cotton, how to raise sorghum, how to raise cattle, how to raise pigs. And he knew it in his gut. And he taught me a lot, about Michael, you do this, you don't do this. And I would say, Mr. Davis, why? He said, well, it works this way. He didn't have, I bet he had a third grade education. My father-in-law had a third grade education and was one of the first in his area to put his land into conservation.
Mhm.
And he didn't hunt. He fished in his little creek, but he didn't hunt. But he said, I'd like to have more quail around. I'd like to have this around. And he said, you can go down there and hunt them because we need them hunted some. And you need to, we've got nutria down there. You need to clear those nutria out. And I didn't know we had nutria I didn't know where the heck they came from until I started working in southern Louisiana and realized the darn Cajuns had let them in. By the way, I love Cajuns. I've worked in southern Louisiana for 30 some odd years, so I have some sweet Cajun friends, but darn it, they brought the nutria in. But anyway, no, so it's one of those things, Larry, where man, I love learning. And I watch you. You love learning.
I
You
do.
go out there and you like, and when I go out hunting with Larry, which I've done a few times, he knows this. We were up in Oklahoma on Choctaw Hunting Lodge land, one of my favorite places in the universe. I know it is
Amen.
one of his too. I get to go back up there in January, and hopefully Larry can join me when I'm back up there. But Larry looked out there and we jumped some deer. And I said, Larry, why are the deer in there? And he explained to me why they were in there. And I love learning that stuff. I didn't know. I think that's the thing that maybe I'm resistant about influencers and TV personalities and that sort of thing nowadays. Too much is left on the cutting room floor of mistakes, boo-boos, and things that they don't know. And it may make folks feel like I gotta know perfect, or I shouldn't be out there, or I never should miss when I'm hunting, or I never should wound. None of us want to. But with conservation and through hunting, we're going to have all of these boo-boos and we're going to have to learn a lot of different things, I think, as we go. And I think a major contribution that young people could make to this outdoor writing and outdoor TV and outdoor blogging as they come up is being honest and saying to their readership and their folks who see them on podcasts and hear them on podcasts and see them on whatever, I went out and I didn't get anything, or I went out and I missed, or I went out and I blew out an animal because I was not stalking through the way I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't paying attention. You don't have to tell everything, I suppose, but boy, I think it's important that we tell people when we boo-boo. And I've had a lot of folks say to me, because I've said, I was hunting Chinese water deer. You're about to go over and hunt Chinese water
Yes, sir.
deer and muntjac. And I blew out the biggest darn Chinese water deer that we saw because my guide tried to keep me in the edge of the habitat there in a hedgerow, setting up the sticks for me. What did I do? I grabbed him, I stepped left, and the buck went, I don't think I'm staying here, dude. I think you're holding a rifle there. And my guide looked at me and I said, you should beat me to death with my own rifle. And he said, look, I've blown an awful lot of animals out over my, guiding years, but he was real nice about it. But, there's in conservation, we are in the same way. We need to understand that we don't know some stuff and we need to learn it. And so, anyway, I appreciate it. Larry, I need to let you go. I could stay here the rest of the day, but I also know you probably have more important things to be doing.
Well, I have no more important things to be doing. The only thing I'm going to add to what you said there, I'm going to keep you here just a little bit longer. I've learned a whole
Absolutely.
lot more from my failures than I have my successes.
Yep.
And but and I've unfortunately made the same mistake twice, a couple, three different times when I shouldn't have. But you're right. We learn from our failures, or we should, and then also learn from your successes. But again, I've always learned more when I screwed something up than if I did everything just right. But with that said, I am headed to. I think that when you're up on the Choctaw, right, that tail end of that, I'm going to be headed to Mexico to hunt Coues whitetail deer. And
Fantastic.
so I am going to try to come up. I'm flying out of Dallas. I'm going to try to come up and spend the day with you before you leave. So I'm really looking forward to that. But again, I just, as I said in the beginning, words can't express how much I truly appreciate your friendship and all that you do, that you've done, and particularly what you're doing now. So to be here with you on this podcast it's a highlight of life as far as I'm concerned,
Oh,
Mike. I
well,
truly, truly appreciate this opportunity.
well, and thank you for being here on Bringing Back the Wild, Larry. And I tell you what, there's always sweet times when I get to talk to you. We will see one another. We'll see one another on the Choctaw, hopefully, but we will also see one another at Dallas Safari Club in Atlanta in February as well. And I tell you what, I am really looking forward to that time. Not just with you. I will love that time too, but I'm looking forward to that convention this year.
Mike, I am too, for of course a lot of reasons, but one of the things is I'm going to get to introduce you as the Educator of the Year, as announced by the DSC Foundation. So again, congratulations to that. Can't wait to be up there to help with that presentation. And again, thank you so very much. And hopefully we'll see a lot of folks there. I think 6th, 7th, and 8th at the World Congress Center there in Atlanta. Plenty of time. They can learn more about it if they wish to go to www.biggame.org and learn all about DSC and a lot of great things we do, but all about the convention, and look forward to seeing you and a whole lot of other folks there.
Thank you, Larry, so much for being here, pal.
Thanks for listening to Bringing Back the Wild. For more stories from the field, conservation-driven articles, and Mike's books, visit MikeArnoldOutdoors.com. Until next time, keep bringing back the wild.